We kind of just assume that ignorance is merely an absence of knowledge, right? Like an empty space waiting patiently to be filled with facts. But it's really not. Ignorance is heavily, meticulously constructed. Think about this for a second. What if the absolute strongest filter blocking objective reality isn't some shadowy government agency or a highly sophisticated tech algorithm, but literally your own brain? We are going to expose the actual mechanics of our own manufactured ignorance. To become truly objective, we have to understand the underlying architecture of why society ignores critical data and how you can stop participating in your own miseducation.
So, we face a fascinating dual threat when it comes to perceiving reality. First, there's a concept known as agnotology. As a sociologist, I use this term to describe the deliberate cultural production of ignorance by external forces. We're talking corporations or political entities specifically doing this to sell a product or maintain a profitable status quo. Now contrast that external manipulation with our own internal sabotage, the ostrich effect. This is our deeply ingrained cognitive bias where we actively, almost desperately avoid negative or uncomfortable information just to protect our immediate emotional state. Let's look at the external threat first.
You want to see intentional agnotology in the wild? Just look at the historical playbook of the tobacco industry. As historians have thoroughly documented, these corporations famously viewed themselves as manufacturers of two entirely different products, tobacco and doubt. Faced with mounting medical evidence, they didn't always deny the science outright. Instead, they systematically drowned it in highly calculated, endless requests for more research. It's pure, weaponized distraction. By constantly demanding more studies, corporations manufacture doubt to delay objective reality. The goal isn't to hide the truth, it's simply to make the truth feel like it's forever debatable.
But hey, we can't just point fingers at corporate boardrooms. Internally, we suffer deeply from myopic loss aversion. When we're scared, we avert our eyes. Look at the behavioral data here. 10% of highly anxious people deliberately avoid checking their bank accounts. Many diabetic patients flat out avoid monitoring their blood glucose levels when they fear a spike. A full 20% of folks in weight loss programs simply refuse to step on a scale. And investors famously ignore their portfolios during market dips. In every single case, we prioritize the immediate emotional relief of not knowing over the profound long-term benefit of factual accuracy.
To magically justify this profound avoidance of reality, our brains deploy a fascinating defense mechanism known as the bias blind spot. This is the absolute, unshakable conviction that your particular group sees the world perfectly objectively while everyone else is hopelessly biased. And here is the truly fascinating, somewhat tragic irony of this whole phenomenon. Higher levels of cognitive sophistication actually result in a larger bias blind spot. Yep, you heard that right. That means smart, highly educated people are actually much better at constructing complex rationalizations to convince themselves they are purely objective while effortlessly dismissing opposing views as fundamentally flawed.
To really understand how we build this machinery of denial, we need to break down the paths to persistence model. This framework maps out exactly how we justify ignoring millions of disagreeing voices. When you encounter a societal controversy, you unconsciously use one of four paths to dismiss the opposition. The informational path allows you to assume the other side is just wildly uninformed. The ontological path lets you decide the issue is purely subjective anyway. The functional path gets triggered when you worry about the severe social cost of changing your mind within your tribe. And the computational path? That's the simplest. You just decide it takes way too much mental energy to rethink your worldview, so you don't.
Consider a quick role-play scenario to see this in action. Imagine a patient experiencing severe cognitive dissonance regarding a new medical treatment. The doctor leans in and asks, "The medical consensus is entirely clear on this, yet you refuse the treatment. Why?" The patient coldly replies, "Because the experts are brainwashed and I possess the actual truth." Right there, the patient is aggressively rejecting expert health consensus by weaponizing that informational path we just discussed. They are attributing massive bias and incompetence to the medical establishment purely to protect their own fragile worldview from shattering. I want to ask you directly, and I need you to be brutally honest with yourself here. When you face dissent, do you genuinely, methodically evaluate the evidence presented to you? Or do you instantly assume the other side is incompetent or corrupt just to avoid the sheer discomfort of changing your mind? If your immediate reflexive response is to label disagreeing others as brainwashed, gullible, or unintelligent, you aren't actually investigating reality anymore. You are simply soothing your own cognitive dissonance. When we encounter divergence, a fundamental disagreement on the facts,
Modern media systems almost always push us away from conciliation and directly toward polarization. They accomplish this reliably through repetition bias, which psychologists also call the illusory truth effect. Repeated statements are systematically perceived by the human brain as more truthful than new information, regardless of their actual validity. The media ecosystem thrives on creating contention and confusion, essentially making absolute lies feel truthful merely through sheer, unrelenting exposure. And that effectively locks us further into our isolated information silos.
Okay, let's audit our own behavior and shift to our intellectual defense toolkit. Ask yourself right now, are there emails in your inbox you are deliberately leaving unread because you dread the contents? Are there financial statements you are aggressively ignoring? Are they medical appointments you are endlessly delaying? If you answered yes to literally any of these, you are actively suffering from the ostrich effect. You are trading your future security, wealth, and health for a few fleeting moments of blissful, manufactured ignorance. Take a brief moment for an interactive exercise designed to totally shatter your own illusion of objectivity. Think deeply about one strongly held belief you possess, political, social, or economic, where you consider the opposing side to be completely and utterly devoid of intelligence. Do you have one in mind? Good. If you genuinely believe that every single person who disagrees with you on that complex topic is just profoundly ignorant or evil, well, you are actively suffering from a massive bias blind spot. You've stopped reasoning entirely and you've started rationalizing.
To fight back against this, we must rigidly audit our information sources for manufactured doubt. Look specifically for a tactic known as enigmatology. This is a fantastic academic term that describes the deliberate, often deeply cynical use of language to obscure true meaning or to create complex riddles where absolutely none exist. Are your preferred news sources actually trying to inform you with objective data? Or are they just trying to generate enough ambient confusion so you'll throw your hands up and stick with your pre-existing tribal beliefs?
We also have to systematically map out our internal avoidance. Think about the exact financial, professional, or health metrics you are terrified to check right now. Be incredibly specific. Then, critically weigh the brief, sharp, short-term pain of looking at that data against the severe, compounding long-term cost of ignoring it. Seeing the catastrophic long-term cost written out in black and white forces your brain's risk assessment center to recalibrate. You suddenly realize the avoidance is infinitely more dangerous than the data itself.
When you encounter an uncomfortable fact, do not bury it. Use this psychological exercise instead. First, physically acknowledge the psychological tension, that tight feeling in your chest when you hear something that contradicts your worldview. Second, log the specific fact that triggered it. Third, forcefully identify which path you are using to write it off. Are you calling the author biased? Are you retreating into subjectivity? Catch yourself in the act of rationalizing. And finally, do the absolute hardest thing a human being can do. Adjust your belief to match the new reality. If we want to permanently shatter structural information bubbles, we must automate our exposure to uncomfortable facts. Build a daily routine. Bookmark an opposing viewpoint from a credible source. Crucially, read it without reacting. By suppressing the urge to immediately argue back in your head, you bypass the amygdala, your brain's emotional defense system, and you actually engage your prefrontal cortex. Then, turn the Socratic method on yourself. Ask, under what specific, provable conditions would my current belief actually be wrong?
When assessing the news environment, run your sources through a strict, uncompromising checklist to ensure you aren't falling prey to the weaponized confusion playbooks pioneered by the fossil-fueled and tobacco industries. Are they constantly demanding more research merely to delay inevitable policy action? Are they holding up a snowball in winter in a desperate attempt to disprove decades of global climate data? Shifting the audience's attention from a massive global reality to a hyper-local anomaly is a classic, cynical tactic to manufacture a false sense of unknowledge.
Implementing these 5 daily microhabits, and particularly designing a self-check habit tracker for negative feedback, is how we actively inoculate ourselves against both internal denial and external propaganda. You must systematically question one core assumption, actively hunt for one uncomfortable statistic, self-check your blind spots, and log your dissonance. But perhaps the most powerful habit is delaying your rejection of opposing views. When you hear a dissenting argument, just tell your brain, I don't have to agree, but I will wait exactly 5 minutes before deciding this is wrong. That 5-minute delay is where intellectual growth actually happens.
To sustain this robust defense, you must systematically dismantle your own cognitive inertia. Consider implementing a rigid weekly plan to actively seek out viewpoints that challenge your core assumptions. On Monday, ruthlessly identify a personal blind spot. On Wednesday, force yourself to consume long-form media from a fundamentally different cultural or political context than your own. On Friday, audit your favorite news site for bias. If we only consume media that warmly reinforces what we already think we know, we are fully complicit in our own miseducation. Treat this schedule like a non-negotiable workout routine for your objective reasoning.
Because the fundamental sociological reality is this: if we don't actively, bravely choose to face the data that scares us, we guarantee that our ignorance will be carefully managed by someone else who stands to profit from it. You are either the architect of your own knowledge or the victim of someone else's agnotology. There really is no middle ground. So I will leave you with this final Socratic question to ponder. If you consider yourself a truly objective person, what uncomfortable truth are you going to force yourself to look at today? Stop burying your head in the sand. Face the data. See you next time.